The park was buzzing with the sounds of a perfect afternoon. Birds chirped, kids played, and joggers moved along the paths, all enjoying the sunny day. In the middle of all this life, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson sat quietly on a bench, trying to blend in. Wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, he didn't want anyone to notice him. He wasn't there for the spotlight, just to relax after a long and busy week. But not everyone was enjoying the peaceful day. Officer Jack Miller, a man known for his bad attitude and quick judgments, walked through the park with a heavy step. He was the type of cop who thought he could control anyone who didn't look like they belonged. His sharp eyes scanned the area, looking for someone to target. And then they landed on The Rock. Miller's mind immediately made assumptions. A man in a hoodie? He must be up to no good. Without a second thought, Miller's hand tightened around his baton, ready to do what he always did: flex his power. As he walked closer to The Rock, his boots making a loud sound on the gravel, he mumbled to himself, "What's a guy like him doing here?" Officer Miller's eyes narrowed as he got closer. He wasn't sure why, but something about this man on the bench bothered him. Maybe it was the way he looked or the way he was sitting so calmly, like he didn't care about the world around him. Miller had already decided that he didn't like him. Without saying a word, Miller stomped right up to The Rock, his voice loud and full of authority. "Hey, you! What are you doing here?" Miller's tone was harsh and commanding, as if he owned the whole park. "You can't just sit around and do nothing." The Rock looked up, surprised. He wasn't bothering anyone, he was just enjoying the day. But Miller wasn't done. The officer's eyes were full of suspicion, and his words were sharp. "You need to leave. People like you don't belong here." His voice dripped with condescension, and it was clear he wasn't interested in hearing The Rock's side. The Rock's face barely changed. He wasn't used to this kind of treatment, but he stayed calm. Slowly, he took off his sunglasses and looked directly at Miller, his gaze steady and unbothered. "What do you mean, people like me?" he asked, his voice even. There was no fear or anger in his words, just confusion. Officer Miller's patience was running thin. His grip on his baton tightened, and the anger was clear in his face. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by someone who wasn't following his orders. The Rock wasn't backing down, and that made Miller's blood boil. "Don't play games with me," Miller growled, stepping closer, his face red with frustration. "I told you to leave, now." He raised his baton, ready to strike if The Rock didn't listen. The crowd around them was growing, and the tension in the air was thick. Miller's eyes flashed with rage as he pointed his baton at The Rock, hoping to scare him into obeying. But The Rock wasn't scared. He wasn't about to let anyone push him around. Standing tall, he looked straight at Miller, his body relaxed but ready. His voice was calm, but there was a strength behind it that made everyone stop and listen. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I have every right to be here," he said firmly. His words weren't just a statement, they were a warning. He wasn't going anywhere. The crowd around them grew silent. People were watching, waiting to see how this would unfold. Miller, now furious, took another step toward The Rock, but the look in The Rock's eyes told him everything he needed to know. If he kept pushing, things were about to get ugly. Officer Miller's face turned bright red. His hands shook with rage as he looked down at The Rock, still sitting there, calm and collected. He couldn't believe it. This guy, sitting on a bench like he owned the place, wasn't listening to him. Miller's whole body was tense, ready to explode. "You think you can just ignore me?" Miller snarled, stepping even closer to The Rock. The tension between them was so thick you could feel it in the air. The Rock didn't flinch, didn't even move an inch. He just stared back, his gaze steady, unshaken by the officer's anger. The Rock slowly stood up, towering over Miller. The moment he moved, the entire crowd seemed to hold their breath. The officer was still fuming, his face red and his hands gripping his baton tightly, but he wasn't looking at a man anymore. He was looking at someone who could easily take him down without even trying. "Don't make this worse for yourself," The Rock said. "You really want to keep this going?" Miller's anger hit a boiling point. He didn't care who this guy was. He wasn't going to be disrespected. He swung his baton toward The Rock, thinking he could make him back down. But the rock was ready. In a flash. The rock's arm shot out and grabbed the baton mid-swing. He didn't even break a sweat. Miller's eyes widened in shock. The rock tossed the baton aside like it was nothing, his muscles tense with power, his eyes burning with anger. The crowd gasped in disbelief. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Miller, the officer with all his authority, had just been outmatched by a man who wasn't afraid to stand his ground. Detective Lee's head was spinning. He'd never expected to be in this situation. Standing before him, calmly sipping coffee, was none other than his boss, Chief Harris. Detective Lee's heart raced, and his mind was filled with questions. How could this be happening? How could he have made such a huge mistake? "Lee, I need you to listen carefully," Chief Harris said, his voice steady but stern. "You've been trying to arrest me all this time. But you didn't realize who you were really dealing with, did you?" Lee's stomach dropped. His mind raced as he pieced together the shocking truth. His own boss, the person he had worked with for years, was the one he'd been investigating. The realization hit him hard. He had been chasing shadows all along. "You thought I was just another criminal," Chief Harris continued, a slight smirk on his face. "But you've been looking in the wrong direction the entire time." Lee opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. The silence between them was deafening. He had been wrong about everything. Chief Harris stood up slowly, walking around Lee with a calm confidence. "You'll never be able to prove anything, Lee. Not when I'm in charge of everything." The detective's mind was racing, but he knew one thing for sure. He had just uncovered something far bigger than he ever imagined. And now, he had to make a choice. Would he keep going down the path of lies, or would he fight back against the very person who had been pulling the strings? Officer Daniels had just finished his shift and was about to head home when he noticed something strange. A car was parked in the middle of the road, its engine running, but the driver was nowhere to be seen. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. With his hand on his holster, Daniels approached the car cautiously, his eyes scanning for any signs of danger. Suddenly, he heard a soft voice from behind him. "Is there a problem, officer?" Daniels spun around, his heart pounding. Standing there was a man dressed in a suit and carrying a briefcase. But there was something familiar about him. The man's face looked like someone Daniels had seen in the news. "Wait a minute," Daniels said, narrowing his eyes. You're Judge Harrison, aren't you?" The man smirked, then nodded slowly. "That's right, officer. I'm Judge Harrison. But I'm also a person just like anyone else." "So, what seems to be the issue?" Daniels was taken aback. He had no idea he had just stopped one of the most respected judges in the city. He had been about to give him a ticket for something as simple as a parking violation. Now, Daniels couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Judge Harrison chuckled. "I think you've made your point, officer. You can go ahead and let me off with a warning." Daniels stood there, unsure of what to do. Should he just let it go, or was there something more to this encounter than he realized? It was late in the evening when Officer Jake Turner decided to stop by a local gas station on his way home. The station was nearly empty, except for one car parked at the pump. As he walked toward the store, he noticed a woman standing by her vehicle, looking lost and nervous. She was holding a small child in her arms, and the child appeared upset. Jake's instincts kicked in, and he approached the woman carefully. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" he asked gently. The woman looked up, startled, but then quickly nodded. "I'm fine. Just waiting for someone." Jake wasn't sure what it was, but something didn't feel right. As he stepped closer, he noticed something alarming. The child's clothing looked out of place for the chilly weather, and there was something odd in the way the woman was acting. "Are you sure?" Jake asked, his tone more serious now. The woman hesitated, then seemed to crumble. "I'm scared. I think he's coming back for me," she whispered. That moment, Jake knew this wasn't a simple case. There was something more going on. He turned his head to scan the area, and then, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a man watching them from across the parking lot. "Stay here," Jake ordered, and immediately he approached the man, his hand on his radio. As Jake got closer, he could see the man's face more clearly, and a chill ran down his spine. He recognized the man. It was a dangerous fugitive wanted for several crimes. With his heart pounding, Jake radioed for backup. He knew this situation was about to get much worse. Officer Daniel Shaw had been working a late shift at the station when he got a call that changed everything. The call came in fast. A suspicious car had been seen parked near a local park, and the driver was acting strange. When Daniel pulled up to the park, the car was still there, the engine running. He parked his patrol car nearby and stepped out, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He approached the car cautiously, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. As he got closer, he could see a man inside, but something was off. The man didn't seem worried, just waiting. "Hey, you! Step out of the vehicle," Daniel shouted, trying to keep the situation calm. The man slowly rolled down the window, revealing his face. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The man inside the car was none other than Marcus Mitchell, the new mayor of the city. "Mayor Mitchell?" Daniel asked, a bit confused. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" Marcus looked at him and smiled nervously. "I'm just relaxing. Taking a drive." Daniel wasn't convinced. He had heard rumors about shady dealings around the mayor, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. "I'm going to need you to step out of the car for questioning," he said firmly, his voice steady but serious. As Marcus opened the door, Daniel noticed a strange bulge under his jacket. He raised an eyebrow, his suspicion growing. What was the mayor really hiding? Just then, backup arrived, and Daniel knew the situation was about to get a whole lot more complicated.